Hello everyone and welcome to Apollo's Artifacts. I am your host, Joshua Smith. If you're like me, you're probably a bit surprised to see this kooky professor making a second appearance on the show. The first time that you saw him on in his little spacesuit here, he was going on a crazed rant about COVID and how dangerous his students were to him personally as supposed vectors for COVID. So now he is appearing for a second time on here for this other rant where he said that the Second Amendment gives, quote, white men the right to shoot black people. And this comes to us from Law Enforcement Today. I'll have it linked below. It begins here, we at Law Enforcement Today could literally write about nothing else but unhinged college professors. They are that prevalent. And I certainly agree. I could have an entire show just about nothing but crazy leftist professors. For this week's edition, we present Professor Barry Mailer, director of the Institute for the Study of Academic Racism at Ferris State University's Big Rapids, Michigan campus. According to Bearing Arms, Mailer was suspended by the university a few weeks back after he sent what can only be described as a bizarre and unhinged video to students in which he made a litany of crazy statements, which included telling students their grades were predetermined before the semester began because he uses predestination as his grading system. And here you can get yet another look at this loon in his little space costume here. And apparently there's a video on YouTube that you can watch all about his lunacy. It says here that he further referred to his students as sea suckers, while quoting or referencing the TV program Deadwood, which was actually a fantastic show that used to be on HBO. I highly recommend you watch it if you haven't seen it. The following is part of his unhinged rant. Quote, I work in a paid effing union job and no limber D sea sucker of an administrator is going to tell me how to teach my classes because I'm a effing tenured professor. He then continued and added the following line to the end of what he described as his soliloquy, which is not taken from Deadwood. Quote, so if you want to go to complain to your dean, F you, go ahead. I'm retiring at the end of this year and I couldn't give a flying F any longer. You people are just vectors of disease to me and I don't want to be anywhere near you. So keep your effing distance. Remember parents, this is what you are sending your children or your young adults into. You're sending them to lunatic, unhinged leftist professors who apparently hate your children but also very much want to brainwash your children. Mailer, however, is not taking his suspension sitting down or quietly. In yet another video rant reported by Michigan Capital Confidential in response to his being placed on administrative leave for his profane, offensive, and disturbing, as described by the university president, rant toward students, he then took to weighing in on the right to keep and bear arms as guaranteed under the Second Amendment. In a January 21st interview posted on YouTube, Mailer defended the earlier statements he made to students. He cited the First Amendment in explaining why his unhinged, profanity-laced video to students should be allowed. He then pivoted to the Second Amendment. Quote, the Second Amendment gives white men the right to carry a gun and shoot black people when they are afraid. I saw him and I was scared, so I shot. Stand your ground, he said. But I think if we all look up the crime statistics, we can very rapidly figure out who it is shoots who the most in what communities, but I'm not allowed to say that here on YouTube because a certain group of people will be triggered and they'll be the ones who are offended and, quote, scared. In other words, Mailer dismisses the Second Amendment while advocating for the First. As Bearing Arms noted, quote, minimizing the importance of one helps to diminish respect for the rest. And representing the Second Amendment as the product and practice of racism is not only historically inaccurate, it ignores the role that guns have played in protecting black lives from real and virulent racists. Mailer is correct when he says that profanity is protected speech, and used in private or perhaps even in public outside of the university setting might be okay. But as a college professor, using such language to describe his superiors or in talking down to his students is out of the realm of his role as an instructor. Clearly, Mailer, first of all, doesn't belong anywhere near a college classroom, and second, he seems like he maybe needs an intervention of sorts. The fact that he's already planning to retire at the end of the semester is probably a good thing. That said, he definitely bears watching. And I certainly agree with that assessment. I mean, he could be a dangerous person. He could be like the guy who up in Louisville recently, a Black Lives Matter activist who, as part of that terrorist organization himself, became a near assassin as he went to a Democrat running for a political position in Louisville and shot at him attempting to assassinate him. But of course that has been very little covered by the media because it does not fit their overall narrative. And the article goes on and on from there. It talks about some other crazy and unhinged leftist professors at other universities such as Penn State, and you can read about those on your own. Next, I come to this gentleman who says that he lives in San Francisco and actually gets paid to remain homeless. So let's move up here to the headline from Daily Mail. I get paid to be homeless in San Francisco. It takes one phone call. Old school junkie says he moved to Woke City because he gets $620 a month that pays for his Amazon Prime and Netflix, and cops are like his neighbors. James, a self-proclaimed junkie living in San Francisco, says the city's soft on crime policies and government assistance make it easy to be homeless there. He shared how he receives $620 cash and 200 food stamps each month while he sells Narcan to addicts and enjoys streaming services on his phone. Presumably that would be the old Obama phone system. This right now is literally by choice. Literally by choice. If we're going to be realistic, they pay you to be homeless here, James said. San Francisco is plagued by drug addiction and homelessness, thanks to leftism and leftist policies. That's the unstated part. Mayor London Breed recently launched an emergency campaign to crack down on open-air drug use and drug dealing in the city's crime-ravaged downtown Tenderloin neighborhood. The city also opened a new linkage center that connects homeless addicts with rehab facilities on January 18. Meanwhile, President Biden also aims to battle drug addiction with his $30 million grant program, intending to provide funds to nonprofits and local governments to make drug use safer to advance, quote, racial equity. And this is part of the free crack pipe and free meth pipe program. So the article begins here. A self-proclaimed old-school junkie who moved from Texas to San Francisco because it's effing easy to be homeless there claims he's being paid by the city government to live on the streets, getting $620 in cash per month and hundreds of food stamps while he sells Narcan and enjoys Amazon Prime and Netflix on his phone. This right now is literally by choice, he says. James, a homeless man with face tattoos who has been living in San Francisco since June, told Michael Schellenberger, author of San Francisco, a book about how the city's progressive leaders are worsening homelessness, inequality, and crime. James said it only took one phone call to receive government assistance, including hundreds in cash and food stamps worth approximately another $100, and notes that the free money is motivation for him to remain homeless. He said, quote, effing phone call, bro. 200 food stamps and $620 cash a month. Forget about it. Why wouldn't I do it? You know, it's effing free money, dude. Why would I want to pay rent? I'm not doing shit. I've got a effing cell phone that I have Amazon Prime and Netflix on. The interview comes as the city's homelessness and drug problems have worsened amid the national opioid crisis that escalated over the course of the pandemic. Both local and federal leaders say they're working to implement new strategies to combat the drug crisis. Well, one of those things would be to close down the southern border, where fentanyl is pouring in from China in seemingly infinite loads. That is not addressed here in this article, of course. Or is it? As I move down here, the junkie actually tells the truth about the situation. James said the drug crisis in San Francisco has become incredibly disgusting, with dealers providing impure substances to users who then overdose because they take drugs alone. And this is because everything right now is being laced with fentanyl. That's everything from marijuana to cocaine to heroin to meth to you name it. It all is getting fentanyl added in because the drug gangs have nowhere else to sell the stuff. They have nowhere else to put it. They have such a super overabundance of it because it is being basically given to them by China that they don't have any alternative method to deal with it. And continuing here, he also blamed the cops for failing to arrest foreign-born dealers, alleging the police are, quote, getting paid with fentanyl. I've talked to the cops here. I'm literally 10 feet away from the drug dealers talking to you guys. Why don't you go arrest them right now, he said. And they're like, arrest them for what? San Francisco is a sanctuary city. We arrest the Hondurans and we put them in jail. They're out 2 days later. If they're letting the Hondurans deal on the corner every day, somebody getting paid with fentanyl, James added. A new, quote, linkage center aimed at connecting homeless street addicts with drug rehab facilities opened in San Francisco last month. But distressing images show an open-air illicit drug consumption site that is now littered with needles and crowded with addicts shooting up in broad daylight. And this is what little kids have to pass by every day as they try to go to school. Probably where they go in to be told that they're horrible racists and that they need to have this drug abuse taking place all over their streets and the people who go out and take dumps in their street. And you know things are bad when even this dude is complaining about how bad things have gotten in this city that he has adopted as his new home.
Where are you from?
Louisiana, Texas area.
How long you been in San Francisco?
Since June. If you're gonna be homeless, it's pretty easy here. I mean, if we're gonna be realistic, they pay you to be homeless here.
When you said that San Francisco pays people to be homeless, what did you mean by that? You mean that literally?
Yeah. I mean, I get $620 a month, dude.
From general assistance,
yeah.
Or would you? How was that hard to get?
Phone call, bro. Phone call. 200 food stamps and $620 cash a month.
Wow.
Forget about it. Why wouldn't I do it? You know, it's free money, dude. Yeah. This right now is literally by choice. Literally by choice. Like, why would I want to pay rent? I'm not doing it. I got a cell phone that I have Amazon Prime and Netflix on. We used to battle with the cops. Now, it's like the cops are... It's like they're your neighbor, you know? The cops told us this morning, like, oh, it'd be easier if you guys packed up in the morning. We wouldn't have to come out here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, pack up in the morning. I'm like, why? You know? He's like, oh, okay. And then went on. His two kids came up and they're like, hey, you guys know where to get any Oxycontin? They're like, I'm 15 and I'm 16. You know, like, I'm an old school junkie, you know? And I'm like, well, look, dude, I'm going to tell you right now, like, you're not going to get Oxycontin out here on the street. I was like, how much money are you trying to spend? And they were like, we got $40. And I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to take your money. And I went and I got him fentanyl. And I fucking brought it back and I set it down in front of him. And I said, this is a gram of fentanyl. This is enough to kill 6 people that have never used it. What I do to get high is this much. And I showed him how much I do. I was like, I'm keeping your money. And now I'm going to teach you how to save each other's lives. Because you're not going to fucking stop. I can't steer you away from doing it, but the best thing I could do for you now is give you real drugs and show you how to do it properly and show you how to save your friend's life. And I showed him how to pull up Narcan and how to inject each other with the Narcan needle in case they died. I needed the money, let's be honest. I've talked to the cops here. I'm literally 10 feet away from the drug dealers talking to you guys. Why don't you just go arrest them right now? And they're like, arrest him for what? And I'm like, dude, what? He's like, San Francisco is a sanctuary city. We arrest the Hondurans, we put them in jail, they're out 2 days later.
Right.
If they're letting the Hondurans deal on the corner every day, somebody's getting paid with fentanyl. Who's winning off of this? You know, we're the homeless. We see it all, like all of it. We see the dirty side of it. You know, like people sucking rocks and dude, it's disgusting. But who's really making the money off this?
Have you seen people OD out here?
Oh yeah, dude. I've saved 6 people's lives last week.
Were
Never even met before.
What were they using?
Fentanyl, banging fentanyl. I can take you to a dead body right now, dude. Some old homeless dude. He was there 4 days ago, and he was there yesterday in the same spot. He's got to be dead. I kicked him and be like, "Yo, you alive?" And I mean, people are stupid out here. Use alone, you know. They get a big bag of fentanyl, and they'll get a different batch, and they're by themselves, and like nobody you for days. The only reason I found him is because I went up there. There's no cocaine in the crack here. I'm not even bullshitting. I've tested it. I know good crack. I know real cocaine and real crack. I'm from the South, man.
So this guy's like the homeless dude with a heart of gold or something, I suppose. He's most certainly the star of his own story. And there's a lot more to the story as it goes on here. I'm not going to read all this to you. I'll let you check it out on your own. But of course, it is interesting to take a look here at the overall crimes in San Francisco, and you can see that there has been a slight decrease for the moment anyway. But some of that probably has to do with what crimes are actually charged which ones are prosecuted and who is just turned loose. And I can't even imagine what's going on with the whole theft category here, since you can go into shops in San Francisco and steal up to $950 worth of things, just rake them right off the shelves into a garbage bag and walk out, and they're definitely not going to arrest you or charge you. So what the hell are these thefts from? And here you get a lovely image of the open air drug use, what that turns into at these so-called safe sites or safe locations for drug abuse. You can see these two are about to flop out of their wheelchairs, and these kind of tent city conditions are very prevalent in California, basically wherever you find people like Pelosi or Maxine Waters. And in this image, I'm not even sure if this lady over here even has a top on, but you can obviously see here that this lady is cashing in on all of her white privilege. And this fellow is in a very poor state of affairs indeed. And as you can see down here at the bottom of the article, there have been well over 100,000 drug overdoses in just the last 12 months, thanks to opioids, meth, and fentanyl. Next up from the Daily Mail, we have this. White Texas professor sues his college after it punished him for publishing piece disagreeing with a black scholar who claimed that music theory in and of itself is white supremacy, and that a Jewish musician persecuted by the Nazis was somehow a racist. Jackson said the University of North Texas took retaliatory action against him after he defended the legacy of Heinrich Schenker, a Jewish music theorist. Schenker is an Austrian music theorist and composer who died in 1935, who has been accused of being a, quote, virulent racist in 2019 by Philip Ewell, probably a racist himself. Ewell, a professor at Hunter College of the City University of New York, has argued that music theory is emblematic of white supremacy. He also raised his concerns on the lack of diversity and how there are many white music theory professors at higher educational institutions. Now, why would he be shocked by that, considering there are probably very few blacks who have any interest in music theory? In fact, I, even as a white person, have not met anyone who knows anything about or is interested in music theory at all of any race. So I'll move down a bit here and I begin the article. In his speech and in his work published after the speech, Ewell, being the black professor, argued that music theory is, quote, white, and raised how he feels uncomfortable as a black man that most music theory professors at higher educational institutions are white. I wonder what color does he think most of these people would be? Is there some sort of distributional curve that he would prefer that would make him feel more comfortable? What exactly would be that distribution, and how would that ever be controlled for? Does he think that there's some government organization that should simply appoint people based upon their skin color to be in these positions? That's usually the sort of thing that the leftist brain wants. Ewell also condemned Galician-born Austrian and Jewish music theorist Heinrich Schenker, whose writings have had a profound influence on subsequent musical analysis, as an ardent racist and German nationalist, and claimed that our white racial frame seeks to shield Schenker from unwanted criticism. Schenker, who died in 1935, suffered persecution at the hands of the Nazis, with Ewell's insistence that he was racist sparking fury. And here you can see the white professor, and here you see the other fellow. After Ewell's essay was published, Jackson sought to organize a symposium with the Journal of Schenkerian Studies that he co-founded at UNT, and called on members of the Society for Music to come up with responses to the essay, which is a normal thing to do, and that's been done hundreds of times in all kinds of other situations, and it's never been a problem before. Those responses were published in July of 2020 and raised different opinions, both in favor and disapproving of Ewell's speech. Jackson's letter was tailored against Ewell's paper on several talking points. It also defended Schenker as a victim of anti-Semitism by raising the argument that the composer had been oppressed for being Jewish while living in Nazi Germany. But one of the things you have to understand is that American blacks, especially American black leftist professors, think that blacks have to have a monopoly on suffering, and they can't allow that Jews have suffered significantly for being who they are as well. This is one of the things that came out with the Whoopi Goldberg brouhaha that took place recently on The View, where she tried to downplay the role of racism in what the Nazis did to the Jews, because to her eyes, black American eyes, she thinks that European Jews are just white like any other whites in Europe. But she doesn't understand that there's actually a complex linguistic and genetic legacy there that draws Jews from the Middle East with Semitic heritage into Europe, who then, of course, did interbreed with other Europeans, but that there are still unique genetic and linguistic and cultural and behavioral practices that were discriminated against by the Nazis. It continues here, Jackson also rejected claims that music theory is racist and offered to explain that African American women and men don't typically grow up in homes where classical music is profoundly valued, and therefore they lack the necessary background. And I would say that is obvious, unless you're talking about hip-hop music or rap music as that which is valued in certain homes. Obviously, that's not going to be the typical material for professors. However, I do personally think that that would make a valuable study as well. After the symposium was made known to the greater public, supporters of Ewell began putting pressure on UNT, calling on the school to fire Jackson, as well as at least 18 faculty members and several grad students. Well, how could you fire grad students? They don't usually work there. They usually just attend the university. What are they supposed to do? Throw them out? Jackson's lawsuit alleges that the university issued a statement saying that it opened a formal investigation into the professor's journal and UNT press. Jackson was then informed by UNT Provost Jennifer Cowley to come up with a new plan on how to address a report from an ad hoc panel outlining problems with his actions. However, a week prior to the deadline he was given, he found out that he had been removed from the journal and that the university would halve any funding going towards his work and the Center for Schenkerian Studies. And it continues here down below. In the lawsuit, Jackson is asking the school to publicly state that it had infringed his First and 14th Amendment rights. He submitted a request asking for the Board of Regents to not be able to take action against him and a request for damages. Timothy Jackson's goals have been consistent from the beginning, and that is to express academic freedom without fear of retaliation from those who disagree. Seems pretty simple and straightforward to me. UNT has failed to protect these rights and has allowed the situation to progress, forcing Jackson to file this suit. In a statement, the University of North Texas claimed that the federal court is not the place for baseless allegations. The defendants have formally notified the Court of Appeals that we are appealing the district court's decision to deny our motion to dismiss. Dr. Jackson's faculty colleagues have not harmed him in any way, and federal court is not the place to try the plaintiff's baseless allegations against them. Further, neither the Board of Regents nor the university have taken any adverse action against Dr. Jackson. The statement concluded with, "We will raise these points to the Federal Appeals Court. Meanwhile, we have filed a motion asking the trial judge to stop all activity in the district court until the parties receive a ruling on the appeal." Now, I, for one, hope that this professor actually wins this case, because this is disgusting, and if what he is claiming is true, it is yet another example of anti-white racism running rampant in the universities. All right, next I move to this. Crime-ridden Denver is now paying businesses to set up in its drug and alcohol-ravaged downtown district in a bid to rejuvenate the area. God forbid that we refer to this as gentrification, anyone? As drug-related crimes in the city are up 26.8%. The Downtown Denver Partnership and the Department of Economic Development announced the launch of the Pop-Up Denver program. The selected businesses could enjoy 3 months of free rent and a $20,000 award to use for interior design and setup expenses and merchandising. Only 5 businesses will be given the vacant spaces on the intersection of 16th Street and Champa, one of the most concentrated pockets of drugs and crime. In 2021, more than 53 drug-related crimes were reported in this area, amid an overall crime surge in the Mile High City. In Denver, robberies are up 75% and drug-related crimes are up 26.8% in the year-to-date compared to the same period. I'm sure they mean 2021. So what you have here is a combination of problems. You have the legalization of marijuana for Denver. You have all kinds of leftist leadership from the mayor to the district attorneys who will not prosecute for all kinds of crimes. And then, of course, you have the COVID lockdown problems, which has been a huge problem for Colorado and Denver specifically, where they have been very tyrannical in their mask mandates and vaccine mandates, and basically they're driving people crazy and unleashing huge amounts of crime on the people who try to live there. But again, this is all born of leftism and leftist philosophies and leftist theories of crime. The article begins here. Desperate city officials in Denver are now paying businesses to occupy vacant storefronts in one of the city's most crime-ravaged districts. In an attempt to tackle the effects of the pandemic and the spike in crime, 4 of the spaces are destined for retail activation, while one of the storefronts will be occupied by an art-based business. Proponents hope the initiative helps to reimagine downtown one storefront at a time and brings long-term paying tenants. This is a program that's designed to give them a runway to success, they say. Our ultimate goal is for the tenants that are selected for these spaces to really convert to long-term lease-paying tenants for participating property owners. And here we can move over and see a handy-dandy chart that compares 2021 with 2022 for the crime in Denver. We can see that drug crimes are up. Violent crimes are up. We see that burglaries are up, yet somehow the image over here shows that it is down. That makes no sense. We see car theft up and robbery up. And here you see similar tent cities that you see in San Francisco, just like I told you in the previous article.
3 months of free rent and a $20,000 incentive package to move into one of those 5 vacant spots is the ask of a new pop-up program in Denver. The goal, however, is to make these businesses permanent tenants and help them get on their feet before committing to a long-term lease. Many businesses felt pandemic pressures put a pause on profits.
We were heavily impacted by COVID.
The sports fan on 16th Street, no exception.
Attendance to games was way down because folks weren't allowed to go. That really hurt our business.
But
See, you heard the key part there. The news tries to say that it's because of COVID, but as that store owner pointed out, it's because of the response to COVID. The leftist total freak out related to COVID, the way they shut down all of these businesses when they should not have, when it was stupid and totally irrational to behave the way that the left did.
unlike their neighbors, they are still open.
We did a detailed inventory of all of 16th Street, and we found that there were quite a number of vacancies.
Empty storefronts litter the area, but COVID might not be the only reason for all the closures.
We've seen a significant amount of crime to those particular stores.
The Fox 31 digital data desk found that 16th and Champa is one of the city's 3 highest concentration of drug and alcohol crimes.
I think that one of the key differences is the population of police that used to be directly in front of our store.
Which is why sports fan owner Derek Friedman is very supportive of a new pop-up program.
The Downtown Denver Partnership has created something that I think is actually pretty clever. So we're very supportive of it.
The program's goal is to get businesses to apply to be in one of 5 vacant locations.
It's designed to give them a runway to success. So the property owners have taken a leap of faith.
They get the first 3 months rent free. And if that didn't already sound too good to be true, they're offering $20,000 in startup costs.
Have a lot of really great reasons for people to come back downtown, and positive energy tends to push out negative activities.
And I move down a bit here in the article. It says here there are a lot of really great reasons for people to come back downtown. We want them to be bringing in lots of people and have a wonderful customer base. However, it points out from 2017 to 2020, between 10 and 30 drug and alcohol related crimes were reported each year. But that changed in 2021 with more than 89 incidents of the sort being reported. In Denver, overall violent crimes are up 19.4% in the year to date compared to the same period of 2021. Serious assaults are up 4% with 210 so far this year and 202 in the same period last year. And of course, I'll have this link below so that you can check it out for yourself. Here from Natural News, I have this. GOP lawmakers sound alarm bell, note that, quote, more and more Democrats are connected to Chi-Coms. If you wondered why elements within the deep state in Congress worked so hard against President Donald Trump's efforts to push back on the communist Chinese in deference to our country, it's because so many of them have deep financial ties to Beijing, say a growing number of Republican senators. GOP lawmakers are sounding the alarm anew following the publication of investigative journalist Peter Schweizer's latest book, Red-Handed: How American Elites Get Rich Helping China, which provides fresh, extensive evidence of how the Chi-Coms have infiltrated our government and corrupted the most powerful Democratic lawmakers, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. More and more Democrats are being connected to Russian oligarchs and the CCP, said Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. She went on to tweet a link to a Breitbart news story featuring a photo of Pelosi, her investor husband Paul Pelosi, and their son Paul Jr., both of whom are believed to have nefarious ties to China and other foreign entities. In fact, Paul Jr. is currently at the center of a number of different federal probes. But of course, it's not just the Pelosis, as we see down here. Representative Claudia Tenney of New York noted in a tweet this week the Biden family is also tangled up with the Chi-Coms. Quote, the Biden family is entangled with and enriched by Chinese Communist Party corrupt officials. Bombshell, Biden family scored $31 million from deals with individuals with direct ties to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence, she tweeted. And if you follow my show, none of this is a surprise at all. As Senator Tom Cotton says here, alarming but not surprising. In brief, Hunter Biden is now the U.S. representative for an intelligence and military-linked Chinese company that was supporting voices calling for an aggressive military posture against the United States and its allies. And of course, how is this any different from the fat, bloated General Milley, who said that if Trump had decided that he was going to launch a first strike attack against China, that he would call his Chinese compatriots, their generals, and tell them when and where the attacks would take place. That, my friends, is a traitor. And of course, this too will be linked below. Next up from Natural News, Massachusetts high school trying to erase, quote, gendered terms from biology class. The nonprofit group Parents Defending Education published a report exposing Needham High School in Massachusetts for reinventing its biology course curriculum to scrub, quote, all gendered terms. The genetics lesson reportedly urges students to no longer make any references to male or female because other, quote, orientations and, quote, identities need to feel, quote, included and respected, even if actual biology gets lost along the way. The, quote, language matters section of the course instruction claims that natural human biology is not a fixed thing, but rather a, quote, social conditioned construct that has long mistakenly taught humans to view sex and gender as binary. Using language that removes gendered terms to talk about bodies helps to ensure that people with diverse sexualities, genders, bodies, and romantic orientations are included and respected, it goes on to state. Other slides in the presentation talk about subjects like anatomical sex, gender expression, gender identity, and attraction, using made-up examples of variation from the animal kingdom as, quote, proof that LGBTQ ideas exist in nature. And then there's a whole series of these slides below. You can check those out on your own. I'm not going to go through them all. These are the typical examples where they try to refer to frogs and clownfish and say that because of those, therefore humans. But I move down here to one of the key issues with this overall, and as it points out here, quote, the claim that nearly 2% of the population is intersex is preposterous and deliberately deceptive. The actual number is 0.018%, or about 1 out of 5,000. And perhaps most absurd is the implication that biological sex in humans is fluid, or can literally change, because it happens to be true of non-human species like clownfish and tree frogs. And a move from there to the New York Post, where we have this. Homeless man slits woman's throat after she let him into her home for a bath. Lesson to all the ladies out there: don't let homeless men come into your home to take a bath. You would think that that's common sense, but this was probably a leftist. A homeless man in Utah allegedly slit a woman's throat after she let him into her home to shower, cops say. Officers responded to a call of a woman heavily bleeding from the neck around 5 p.m. last Sunday at her home in Salt Lake City. She was transported to a local hospital in critical condition, underwent emergency surgery. Her condition was later upgraded to stable, but her current condition is unknown. The woman told investigators that she let the man, later identified by police as 30-year-old Eric Jones, into her home to bathe. Jones was located by city police around 1 a.m. Friday and later booked at the Salt Lake County Metro Jail on one count of aggravated assault. Why would it not be attempted murder? But again, don't let the homeless into your home to take a shower or a bath, please. Next, from the great Paul Craig Roberts, every state with an income tax is a slave state. And thankfully, I live in Tennessee, where we do not have a state income tax, and we run a massive budget surplus every single year. It begins here. The headline might seem extravagant, but it's true. Readers might not realize its truth because people tend to associate slavery with confinement, but that is incorrect. The slave was confined to his place of work because that is where his labor was used, and mobility in those times was extremely limited, not because confinement was a feature of slavery. A slave is a person who does not own his own labor. His labor is owned by another. On 19th century plantations, about half of a slave output was used to feed, clothe, and house him. In other words, the slave was taxed at a rate of 50%. The other half was return on the capital the owner had invested in the slave. According to economic historians, earnings on the investment varied over time but seldom was extravagant. Slavery was brought to the British colonies not because it was profitable, but because there was no other labor force to work the fertile land. Some historians concluded that the return was declining and that slavery was on its way out. In medieval times, serfs were less productive than slaves in the 19th century. Historians I read decades ago concluded that the productivity of labor was so low in medieval times that if more than 30% of a serf's labor was claimed by the lords, the serfs could not reproduce and would revolt. In modern times, the slave's labor is owned by the state and collected through an income tax. If the tax is progressive, the higher your income, the less you own of it. The highest paid have the least ownership of their labor or creativity, or however you care to put it. Prior to the Reagan tax rate reduction during 1981 to 1983, the highest U.S. earners only owned at the margin 30% of their labor income. A head of household faced a 54% marginal tax rate at $44,700 of annual income and a 70% marginal tax rate at $161,300 of annual income. They met every definition of a 19th century slave but one. They could refuse to work and not be whipped for refusing. Today in the U.S., the highest tax bracket is 37%. That is a marginal tax rate, average tax rate. On your first chunk of income, the tax rate is 10%, but as your income crosses thresholds, the tax rate rises to 12, 22, 32, 35, and then 37% of every dollar a head of household earns over $523,600. In 1952 and 1953, the highest marginal tax rate in the U.S. was 92% and was 91% for all other years between 44 and 63. This pretty much made the rich more exploited than medieval serfs and 19th century slaves, but we never hear about reparations for the rich. With the large incomes of billionaires, 37% comes close to being their average tax rate. To avoid handing over 37% of their labor to a government plus state income taxes, the really rich try to structure their income so that most of it is in the form of capital gains. Currently, long-term capital gains are taxed at 15% or 20%. Some types of gains can be taxed at 25 or 28%. Some readers might recall that some years ago, Warren Buffett, one of the world's richest persons, said that his secretary's income was taxed at a higher rate than his. That was true because his secretary's income was wages and his income was in the form of capital gains. See, these are the tricks and loopholes that are used by the billionaire class. There is much dissatisfaction with the low capital gains tax rate, especially as capital gains are associated with the rich, but consider a couple of points. Suppose you buy stock for $50,000 and the stock price drops so that your holdings are reduced to $45,000. As you haven't sold, you only have a paper loss, but suppose the stock pays a $4,000 dividend, keeping you almost whole at $49,000. That's pre-tax. You have to pay income tax on the dividend. You end up taxed on holdings that have declined, not risen in value. You are taxed on a decrease in your net wealth. Next, consider this point. Generally speaking, there is no such thing as a capital gain. Look at it this way. Your $50,000 investment rises to $60,000. You sell and have, according to U.S. tax law, a $10,000 gain on which you must pay income tax. After you pay the tax, your holding is less than $60,000, the replacement cost of what you sold. In other words, you had no gain. You had a decline in net worth by the amount of the tax. In an equity market in which the Fed is not making the super rich richer by pumping liquidity into the stock and bond prices, share prices rise because the company is becoming more profitable, perhaps from better management, perhaps from better technology, perhaps from new products, perhaps from offshoring its production. The rising income is being taxed by the corporate income tax, by income tax on executive bonuses, by income taxes on dividends. In other words, the rise in stock price has already been taxed in these ways. To tax it again as a capital gain is deceptive. There is a real form of capital gain. Suppose a government puts a new road through a property. The value of the property with road frontage goes up. That is a capital gain to the owners created for them by taxpayers. Classical economists believe that it was this kind of gain that should be taxed, not labor and investment income. To classical economists, it was nonsensical to reduce GNP by taxing labor and capital. Moving down a bit here, he says, governments are always deceptive about taxation. In the U.S., legal forms of slavery were abolished in the 19th century, but the Revenue Act of 1913 resurrected slavery with the income tax, which assigns ownership of part of a person's labor to the government. Years ago, I told the tale of the income tax, and I wish that I could find it. The income tax was used to lower tariffs and to cover the lost revenue with a tax on income. The states had to approve an income tax. To secure approval, the schemers brought the tax in with such low rates on such high incomes that only 3% of the U.S. population was subject to the income tax. A 1% tax was imposed on incomes above $3,000, a high income in 1913, and a top tax rate of 6% on incomes over $500,000, an unimaginable income in those days. Once the tax was on the books, World Wars I and II provided ample excuses for widening the tax net and raising the rates. It seems that the people are always outsmarted by their governments. It has always puzzled me that with all the talk about slavery and reparations for American black people, no one ever focuses on the income tax as the reimposition of slavery. Today, not all black Americans live on welfare. Many of them work. The fact that they earn means they are subject to the income tax, which means that they, like the 19th century slaves, do not own their own labor. Reparations would just be corrupting like welfare. Blacks and the rest of us would do much better to focus on reclaiming the ownership of our own labor and tax the real forms of capital gains instead. This requires intelligence, one of the scarcest resources in the United States, and I completely agree with that. Next, I have this from the Post-Millennial. British nurses are fired for, quote, transphobia after raising concerns about trans patients in women-only wards. So it says here, Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne warned that the privacy, dignity, and safety of female patients was being compromised by the government's adherence to woke narratives and the imposition of inclusivity-based politics. She told Parliament that the policies imposed by the NHS is allowing male patients who self-identify as women to be placed in single-sex wards, causing the safety of women to be, quote, diminished severely. Lady Nicholson called for patients to be allocated to wards based on their birth sex and said that existing policies are now affecting the ability of nurses to do their job. According to the Peer, a nurse said that under her hospital trust policy, trans rights supersede all other rights and concerns. The Peer informed Parliament that nurses are, quote, inhibited from speaking out about the issue out of fear of being branded transphobes or fired from their work. I have met several nurses who have lost their jobs because of this, she said. A doctor recently delivered a baby. He said it was a girl and he was accused of transphobia. So it seems that the insanity and craziness of leftists knows no bottom. I'll have this link below so that you can check out the rest of the article on your own. And finally, I come to this from the Daily Signal. This is an older article from 2016. Debunking Leonardo DiCaprio's climate change documentary. And since his documentary didn't make very much headway, he went on and made this ridiculous movie, Don't Look Up, which is meant to get people terrified about climate change and pretends that somehow news organizations would ignore a giant comet or meteor or asteroid that's about to impact the planet. A total absurdity. So this is from Nicholas Loris, an economist who focuses on energy, environmental, and regulatory issues from the Heritage Foundation. Leonardo DiCaprio released his climate change documentary Before the Flood on National Geographic. The actor has become one of the largest public faces pushing for action on man-made global warming. I make a brief cameo in the movie, so several friends asked how I felt being lumped in with the climate deniers. I simply commented that many climatologists believe the science is not settled. I guess that makes me a science denier and a shill for the fossil fuel industry. To be honest, I had not planned on watching Before the Flood. I assumed the film would spit out the same tired narrative. Industrial progress is destroying the planet, and big oil is funneling money to politicians and conservative organizations to stop meaningful action on global warming, but I did watch it, and such is the case. There are many claims worth addressing throughout the hour-and-a-half long film. Here are some of the issues that warrant the most attention. Lifestyle changes for thee, but not for me. And this is a constant one that you get from these Hollywood types, especially Leo. Flies all over the world on private jets. He's constantly on yachts with all kinds of models and all this sort of stuff. And then he wants to turn around and lecture poor people and say that it's a problem for them to drive back and forth to work every day. As it says here, during a moment of self-reflection in the film, DiCaprio admitted that his carbon footprint, quote, is probably bigger than most most people's? Probably. How about tens or hundreds of thousands of times bigger than most people's, Leo? Yet a theme throughout the documentary and its supporting website emphasizes lifestyle changes that you should make to reduce global warming. The suggestions include line drying your clothes, buying a hybrid vehicle, reducing your air travel, and definitely don't fly first class, buying less meat, and not drinking bottled water. If people want to eat vegan and buy an energy-efficient dishwasher, that's their own prerogative. Instead, hypocritical elitists would rather tell you how to live your life and encourage government mandates and regulations to enforce those changes. And that is what is going to be coming on the back of what they've done during COVID. They're going to switch all the system over to try to impose these climate crisis narratives on you. Not only do these policies restrict your individual freedoms, but we remember what Howard Stern and Arnold Schwarzenegger said about our freedoms: F your freedom. Remember, they both said that. And that's what they're going to turn around and say about this climate nonsense. The film conveniently ignores the costs of these policies, which are significant. Cumulatively, the federal government's war on coal, along with the regulations on oil and natural gas production, will drive energy costs higher for households and businesses, hitting low-income families the hardest. And it always hits the poor the hardest. And what do we get for it all? Another gaping omission from Beyond the Flood is how taking action would actually make a difference, or more accurately, would make no difference at all. Even if the U.S. were somehow able to transition to a zero carbon dioxide economy, the planet would be a few tenths of a degree Celsius cooler by the year 2100. Debunking climate alarmism. It wouldn't be a climate documentary without hearing the phrase, "the science is settled," or that 97% of climate scientists agree. This 97% statistic is nothing more than a false talking point. The figure comes from a 2013 study in Environmental Research Letters that examines the abstracts of nearly 12,000 academic papers on climate change. Of the more than 4,000 studies that expressed an opinion, 97.1% endorsed the consensus position that humans are causing global warming. That doesn't mean 97% of the climatologists endorse man-made, imminent, catastrophic warming. Experts have a wide range of theories as to the magnitude of warming, the causes, the rate of future warming, and so on. To demonstrate just how bogus the 97% statistic is, David Legates, former director of Delaware's Center for Climate Research, examined the same papers. He found that a mere 1% of the 4,014 papers expressing an opinion on climate change claimed that the majority of warming since 1950 is man-made. Despite imagery in the documentary alluding to more frequent and intense natural disasters, the data show no trends for extreme weather events. The current rate of sea level rise lies far beneath any alarmist projections. Coral reefs are showing their resilience. Beyond the Flood even pays lip service to now debunked climate research, the hockey stick graph. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, used the hockey stick for years to illustrate rapid global warming, but it has proven to be fabricated. Rather than interviewing climatologists who disagree with the concept of imminent, catastrophic man-made warming, the documentary labels dissenters as scientifically ignorant deniers. And this is something that the left loves to do, and they just worship capital S science with the trademark symbol at the end of it, even though they have no idea what science actually is or actually says at all. And I'm not going to belabor this article. It goes on and on. It talks about carbon dioxide. It talks about how developing nations want affordable and reliable energy. And it concludes that the documentary is riddled with inaccuracies, hypocrisies, and half-truths, is all hype and no substance. And of course, I'm not surprised at all. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.